Hey Judy, how are you?
Yeah, it's good, Nick, and it's wonderful to see you after all those years of world darkness.
COVID.
So I think
COVID.
no one.
Did you even have COVID? We did in Melbourne.
Well, we're in Tasmania,
Yeah.
and we keep it a little bit secret how we dealt with COVID down there. Look, we had 6 weeks of it, and I think that was a big shock to Tasmania. 6 weeks where you couldn't go out, and 5 walks with the dog a day, and. But I look back now, and actually I was walking down the streets of Melbourne last night with my daughter and her partner and saying, can you believe that we couldn't do this and we might have gone to prison for doing this in our lifetime?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
You wouldn't have read about it.
No.
And if you did, you wouldn't have believed it.
Well, you can't believe it, and even now I can't believe it, and certainly in Victoria, there's no doubt about that. But Tasmania gave us as me personally, and my husband and I, we were in Tasmania. We haven't spent a lot of time together for reasons I'll chat as we talk about who I am. But suddenly we were in a house together. He was doing his PhD. He thought he'd died and gone to heaven because he had to go nowhere. I'm the social one. He didn't have to go out. He didn't have to tell me that he didn't want to go out anywhere. So he thought it was a fabulous time. But we were in a house together for a year after he's a seagoing seafarer. Suddenly we're at home, stuck together. It was a fabulous year for us personally.
Lucky you get on.
We got on very well. We were quite surprised, but also we spent a lot of time exploring Tasmania because we couldn't go anywhere else. So,
nice.
I mean, there was to everything there's an upside and a downside. But no, just walking around the streets of Melbourne last night, I thought I just can't believe it. And I often think in airports, because I do travel a lot, I just can't believe they were shut down. Not in Tasmania, not in Australia, but around the world. These massive airports.
So, Judy Martin, I did a little bit of research, so I want to know if you're Judy Martin, the pro wrestler, Judy Martin, the singer, or are you Judy Martin, the executive lead? So I think just to introduce you to any of the listeners there. So who is Judy Martin? When I did that research, I found that you have many talents.
Well, Nick, I'm definitely not Judy Martin, the wrestler.
Right.
Yes. The singer, debatable. I've always wanted to sing.
Depends on who you ask.
It always wanted to sing, but no, debatable. I'm not the Judy Martin singer that you found. You obviously had no photos with these. No. But Judy Martin, the executive lead, yes, I am. The executive lead of Sage Study Tours.
So Sage Study Tours. And so we'll talk about Sage, but where did you grow up? What did you want to be, and how's your career led you to now where you are with Anchor Excellence and Sage Study Tours?
Yeah. Interesting looking back on that journey, Nick, and I do that a lot when I'm travelling internationally. I grew up on the west coast of Tasmania, which even to Tasmanians is like the end of the earth. My father was a geologist. We lived in a small mining town. Our life, I went away to boarding school. We had no school after grade 8, so you had to go away to boarding school. Yeah. So I went away to boarding school at age 11. And all I ever wanted was to be invited home to a farm of the other boarders. But all they ever wanted was we had a great family, a wonderful family. I had a wonderful father. He died very early, which will come into why I ended up in the healthcare industry. But they all wanted to come to my place because it was always fun to be at our house. But apart from that, I spent my life underground. So we'd put on the hard hat and the miner's light and our gumboots, and we'd walk in 2 kilometres into the mine, and then down we'd go in the shaft, and we had to turn our lights off, and Dad would make us feel for water because we knew if there was a crash, you'd have to find where the crack was if the water was coming through. I look back now and I think that is just so bizarre. It was we had a gravel road out to the northwest coast, no TV. All those sorts of things, but as I said, all I ever wanted to do was please invite me to your farm for the school holidays, and everyone would say, I've asked my parents if they can come back to you. But in that journey, it was a very male-dominated town. It was very rugged.
What town was it? Was it Queen?
Rosebery, so even smaller than Queenstown.
Right.
And the highlight was the Sunday football between the teams around the West Coast. They had 2 pubs in the town. I think my mother lived there for 30 years and never stepped foot in either of the bars of those pubs.
Yeah, right.
My mum and dad were on every committee in town. They were secretary, treasurer, chairman, whatever, of the netball, the football, the social, softball, the consequently, I played every sport. We swam. I was a state swimming champion. Well, you wouldn't know it to look at me now, would you?
I was a swimmer.
Yes, so big swimmer. Had aspirations of the Olympics. I think one of the girls I swam against went to the Olympics. I love the story that Chris Fagan, Brisbane Lions coach, I swam against him in the under-12s because there wasn't enough kids to have boys and girls. You swam against everyone.
Did you beat him?
I beat him. So every time Brisbane Lions come on TV, I do have a little Chris Fagan, and everyone goes, yes, Mum swam against him in the under-12s and won. So it was a charmed life.
Yeah.
But when we lived there, we didn't think it was. Looking back, and often if I'm on a stage study tour in London or New York, I think Judy Druitt, the little girl from Rosebery, Tasmania, to myself, to think you really can do anything. Yeah. And that's taking gender aside. You can do anything. Yeah. But in that, my mum was a teacher, so she always worked. So it was never questionable that women had the same opportunities as men. We didn't have that big city or competitive schooling or anything like that. It was just all community. Everybody helped everybody. You never questioned that if someone got sick, the whole community would rally. And my father had rheumatoid arthritis all his life, so he would go underground a lot, but he was very physically affected by his rheumatoid arthritis. So that sort of made me open to the health care industry years before I probably might have been in any other life. But looking back, I did just think I could only ever have been a teacher or a nurse. Like if I knew what I knew now, or even in my 40s, I probably would have been the manager of the Accor hotels. Right. You know, if I'd known that there was a whole world out there. Our whole world out there was, Hobart on a big day. Yeah, that was a big trip to go to Hobart. Yeah, so interesting journey. And when I look back, as I said, even the west coast of Tasmania now is becoming a real tourism hub. But that's only been in the last 10 years. Before that, it was still the end of the earth. Mm. But the experience of living there was magnificent in a small mining town.
Well, if it's the end of the earth, it's a beautiful end of the earth.
Well, it is a magnificent end of the earth. We didn't think that then. It rained 368 days a year. Yes.
And so career-wise, so either teacher or nursing, and you ended up in nursing?
Well, I actually left matric. I was lazy. I had a brain, but I didn't use it. It was, if you get 51, who will know in 20 years, which is still true. I didn't use it anywhere near as much as I should have, noting that Mum and Dad were paying for good education. But I left and left matric, or what is it, year 12 they call it, back then it was matriculation, left matric and went to the local next town and worked in the ANZ Bank because I wanted to get money, and I convinced my parents that I was going to buy a house and do all these wonderful good things. I had no intention of doing that. I just wanted to really have a good gap year. I had a gap year before they invented them. And then I said to Mum and Dad, I've got a really caring nature and I want to be a nurse. Well, that wasn't true. I had found out that you got paid $9 a week to go nursing. Right. And if you went to uni, you got nothing. So I still had that, care with Dad, but really it was the $9 a week that was the attractor. Yeah. So I got into the Royal Hobart Hospital for my nursing training, but I couldn't get in for the next intake. And I think I also got into Launceston General Hospital, but the Hobart one was later, so I thought, well, I can work at the bank and earn a little bit more. So I was money driven. Yes. At that young age, it wasn't a bad deal. So I did go off to Hobart and did my nursing training, and during that training, Dad died. So very young, he was 49, which didn't hit me until I became 49 how young he was. Mm. And it's still now quite odd, me being 60, to look back and think my father was 49. It's a bit of a head twist. So my mum had to leave the mining town because my younger brother's siblings were still in high school. Mum moved to Hobart. I was now nursing at the Royal. So life took a whole different turn. And then I finished nursing and ended up at the Alfred, came over to the Alfred in Melbourne doing burns nursing, and worked for a brilliant professor Professor Masterton, and at that stage I arrived in January, and the Ash Wednesday bushfires happened in February, so it was a baptism of fire, no pun intended. Yeah, but marvellous, fantastic time at the Alfred here, and learnt, but so you covered everything. You covered intensive care, emergency department, medical, nursing, surgical. And then I ran into a girlfriend I trained with. I went home to Hobart to see Mum, and there was a Hobart nurse there, and she said, "Oh my God, I'm working in Darwin and they pay for you to get there, and they give you a unit and you live in this village." So I turned around to Mum and said, "I'm going to the Royal Darwin Hospital." So off I chuffed, and in those days I went by bus, Melbourne to Adelaide, and then Adelaide up to Darwin by bus, and moved into the Royal Darwin Hospital Village. This is in the mid-80s, and had a ball. That was and very remote then. Darwin was not the cosmopolitan city it is now. So had a fabulous few years up there doing a lot of Indigenous health. Went up to Bathurst and Melville Island, and I remember once a PA came over the PA system. There's been a Ross River outbreak in Alice Springs. Would anyone want to go to Alice Springs? So standing next to a girlfriend, I said, "We're going." So we chuffed down to admin and ended up in Alice Springs doing a lot of remote nursing. And so I look at all those early years of my care or nursing career and think the experiences I got, I don't think young kids get that now. They go to the adventure with a career and adventure, but also what covered, you know, as I said, remote area nursing, Indigenous care. You learnt so much, and it just became part of the fabric of who you were in this professional journey that started to take me somewhere that I didn't drive. It just started to mould around me. But I learnt far more than I had I just stayed at the Royal Hobart Hospital and gone to a ward. And
it's because it's one of the reasons for this series of discussions that we're doing is about all manner of things that affect us in life, and whilst it then talks to healthcare specifically. But that's really interesting to me because it was about accepting and tackling opportunity when it came, and sometimes it feels like today we're a bit insular. We don't necessarily want to step out of our comfort zone as much, but the opportunity presented comes over the PA, we're going, and you just tackled it. And
I don't even know if it was opportunity, it was excitement. But also, Nick, I think now when we're talking about workforce and attracting people to healthcare and aged care, and I think of this again, it was just opportunity, but this adventure. It wasn't excitement, it was adventure.
Yeah.
And I think we've lost that ability to have adventure because everyone's trying to pinhole themselves into this career, and you're in aged care. Well, aged care is just, as you know, hundreds of jobs in aged care. There could be marketing, there could be international relations, there could be personal care, there could be IT. The adventure side of that's gone a little bit. We're too quick to bracket ourselves and think we've got to stay on this career path, maybe in one organisation. And there is so much adventure to be had in health and aged care.
Yeah.
And even my morphing from healthcare into aged care, that's another story in itself. You know, how that happened, it was not planned. It was a serendipitous opportunity. So I'd gone to Darwin. I met my now husband, we've been together over 40 years, but back then he was a young naval officer. It was Darwin, there was nurses, doctors, naval officers and Air Force, and we all socialised together. And so I met him, and then started the life of a naval officer's partner and wife, and moved around. But I ended up in Sydney with him, married now, and with a baby, and the Gulf War broke out. So he chuffed off to the Gulf War, and see you in 8 months. I was in Sydney with a young baby, didn't know anybody, had no family there. And my brother came to visit one day and said, "Oh, do you know there's a nursing home just around the corner from where you live?" And I thought, well, I needed some 8 to 4 work. And so I walked around there with my pram, crying, because I often tell this story now, tears, thinking at my nursing graduation, Judy Druitt, the nurse most likely to make it. And here I was going to a nursing home. Now I'm disgusted by that now, that was what I thought then.
Yeah.
But it shows that if I was thinking it as a health practitioner, the stigma that was attached then, it's a lot better now, but certainly I went around thinking the nurse most likely to make it, I'm going to a nursing home. Well, I got around there and a fantastic woman. It was Vaucluse Nursing Home and it was owned by a couple. The lady's name was Rose Levy. She was the director of nursing. And I walked in the door and Paul Keating's Training Guarantee Act had just come in. Every employer has to put so much percentage of their income into training. She said to me, would you like to be our nurse educator? 2 days a week and you can bring the baby. And because her idea was if you bring the baby into aged care, what a wonderful setting for the residents who live there. So she was ahead of her time.
I was going to say, it's almost like the birth of multi-generational care.
So she got it, and it wasn't, it was an older place. It was a very, very high care clinical model then, but it was still care, but it was a hospital setting. But she was the most amazing woman. So I ended up working there for 2 years and became the nurse educator. But what happened was, so I started, and on about my 5th day, a funeral home walked in and said, we're opening a new funeral home up in Bondi Junction. And obviously they wanted business from the nursing home, but they said, but we can offer you things like use of our training rooms if you need training rooms. And so I was the new nurse educator. I thought, well, every other aged care home in Sydney must have the same problem. They've just been given people to be nurse educators. So I rang around, no computers in those days, or they'd just started. So I rang around every nursing home in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. And I said, I'd like to convene a meeting, and we're going to meet at the funeral home, brand new funeral home with brand new training rooms. So all these people came that had been told, you're now the direct nurse educator. So we had a meeting and I said, how about we establish ourselves as the Eastern Suburbs Aged Care Nurse Educators Committee, and we'll nominate who wants to write, like I'll write on incontinence and you write on falls and you write on nutrition, and we'll put it all together and we'll swap each other's notes, and then we'll have a nurse educators program for aged care. And that's how, and I think that committee went for about 20 years.
Really?
After that. So that was my journey into aged care. So then I became very, well, what's happening in aged care? And then we started doing staff swapping around the eastern suburbs. So again, it was making something like COVID, making something out of a situation that had started, and in this case it was training in aged care. And then not long after that, so I worked there for a few years, loved it, and I said the director of nursing, she changed my life. And I often look back and thought she was the point that got me into aged care, and be it God, serendipity, whatever else, that was where I was supposed to be at that time. And my husband came back from the Gulf 9 months later. I must have stayed there for another year, and then I started to part-time at another education service for aged care. And again, that was for long-term unemployed. There was a lot of funding going into aged care and training for long-term unemployed. So I worked for a company in King's Cross that had set themselves up as an education department and were making a lot of money out of aged care, but didn't give a damn about aged care. They were just getting a lot of funding. So another nurse and I got together and we said, well, we were going to write a formal aged care training program. So we did. We met on weekends and wrote it, and then we took it to what was called ANTA in those days. I think it was the Australian National Training Authority. Took in our paperwork, and got it registered. And just at that time, my husband came home and said, we've been posted to Malaysia on a diplomatic posting. I thought, oh. So off we chuffed to Malaysia, and I thought, well, there goes that career. And at our first cocktail party, which was the High Commissioner welcoming us to the delegation of a High Commission in Malaysia, I was talking to a guest, and it was an architect, and from Thomson Adsett Architects.
Right.
And he said, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm in aged care. What do we do? This is the early 80s, oh no, 90s. And I'm in aged care, like it meant the world. And I said, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm an architect, Australian architect. I've got an office over here and we're actually working in aged care. And I said, oh my God, well, I'd love to talk to you, but at that stage I wasn't allowed to work. I had to play mahjong and bridge and entertain. Yep. And I had an entertaining allowance, and that was my job, was to support Peter in his role. And so I said, well, look, I'll love to come and look at your office. And I went over to their office the next day. He sent a driver and off I chuffed in his car. And he said, oh, we're running an aged care conference because Malaysia don't have an aged care industry, for want of a better word. Filial piety was very strong there. The family look after, so it was almost abhorrent to think that aged care was an industry. And he said, but we are running a conference because we do need places for aged care. And I said, well, look, I'll lick envelopes for you with your invitations, because I thought when I go home in a year, on my resume it will be assisted with International Aged Care Conference. Okay. And to be logistic, or you know, when you're, anyway, to have it, you know, I had done that, so that went on the resume. And he said, oh, that would be great. Went over the next day to help him do the invitations, and he hung up the phone and said, oh, one of our speakers is cancelled. And he turned around and he said, oh, you can't speak on the Australian aged care industry, can you? Now, Nick, at that stage, one of my skills, and it still is, was convincing people I had them, not actually having them. So I said, yes, I can speak on the Australian aged care industry. Computers had just started. Right. I had an email address given to me by the Australian High Commission, but I didn't have anyone to email, because I thought, well, who do I email? Because they'd given me an address, but I thought none of my colleagues were on this thing called email. Anyway, fortuitously, I went home that day, and our unpacking had come, and I was ticking off my boxes, and they said box 86, and I said, no, box 86 should be back in Australia in storage. And they said, well, no, it's here. So I ticked it off and thought, well, I wonder what that box is. And then at the end I said, oh, we're missing box 68. And they said, oh no, well, box 68's back in Australia in storage. And I looked up what box 68 was, and that was all my entertaining gear. And I thought, oh my God, I've been told I've got to come here and entertain, and now my box is back in storage. Well, what's box 86? And I opened box 86, and it was all my training notes from my training program on aged care that I had got registered before I'd left. So, and at that very time, just that I'd sorted this out, thinking, thank you, God.
I'm like getting goosebumps here,
yes.
Right?
The Australian High Commission van pulled up in the house, and two little men popped out with a cane basket and said, Mrs. Martin, here's your entertaining gear from the Australian High Commission. And it was all our plates and glasses and everything that was in box 68 that I thought I had to bring myself. So that started a whole other journey. I ended up working for Thomson Adsett. They couldn't pay me, but they would say, oh, you know, you and Peter are going up to Penang for a weekend or whatever. So starting this, talking about the Australian aged care industry at their conference. Well, then we're up, you know, a week later to Thailand. And I remember my husband came home and he said, oh, you know, what did you do today? Almost being a bit tongue-in-cheek. And I said, well, actually, I've just had my travel organised because I'm off to Thailand next week. And he was going, oh, why aren't I surprised? Yeah. We had a fantastic armour. Our kids were little then. So all that was sorted. I didn't have to worry about that. So for 6 months I went around Malaysia and Thailand, and then ended up doing some work as a consultant for the Malaysian government on aged care, and therein started the rest of my life.
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing.
When I look back, it was amazing. At the time, you didn't think it, did you? Like in those, when we were young, 20s, married, young kids, you know, it was just, oh, where's the next adventure coming?
Well, I think sometimes you have to position yourself to kick the goal, right? And so, you know, the opportunities come, somebody's passed you the ball and you've just been open to the opportunity. all of that has played into leading to where you are now today. So I want to talk about SAGE and the SAGE study tours. I think you were on one when we first met.
Yes.
And
I was, indeed.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So again, just about fortuitous opportunity. It was excellent. And you're also currently a member of GAN, the Global Aging Network. So, you've not just had experience in Australia, you've had global experience. And is it safe to assume that that's what's led to saying, well, hey, this is something that the industry needs? Is that global exposure, that global experience?
Totally, Nick. And what happened was, when I was in Malaysia, look, yes, I talk in jest how all this happened, but then I thought, well, I have to do my research now. You know, and I said computers were just starting to be learnt. So I thought, I can't just be a fake here. You know, it's all good to tell the story, but now I really do need to know what I'm talking about if I'm going to be representing Thomson Adset around Asia doing this. So I did a lot of research, and so we stayed in Malaysia for a year, and I did that. And then I came back to Australia, and we were posted to Cairns, I think. And the Thomson Adset kept saying, we still want to employ you. And I said, well, what will we do? And they said, we'll make it up as we go. So to them, I look back now, again, this is the 90s, I was almost like their clinical advisor on building aged care homes. Now that was unheard of then, so good on them too for thinking laterally of having a health person on putting into their design and their model of care. And they said, oh, we're doing a job in Cairns, we'll work out, you know, employing you to do that. So again, it was opportunistic and time, but a very good company that were invested, and they were doing a lot of international work. So I became very interested in that as well, and then became very interested. I'd now done Indigenous work. I'd now been living in Malaysia. I'd travelled around Thailand and up to Hong Kong. So there was a cultural mix that started to come into my early conversations on aged care, going, well, when I was in Darwin and Alice Springs and up in the islands nursing with approach to elders, and then I was in Malaysia with a very filial piety cultural background, and then now I'm back in Australia and looking at Australian for a country that's doing for a company that's doing a lot of health work in the Middle East. They were doing then, and up in China. It started to really think, well, there is cultural influences in aged care. What happened then was I went on a study tour that was run by a very unsavoury character, one that ended up on A Current Affair and all those TV programs, and it was for aged care, and I thought at the time I'd applied for a scholarship and won it, and so it was big news in the family, until I found out when I got on this trip that everyone else was on a scholarship and had won it. And right. Some of those Australians I'm still quite good colleagues with, actually. And we would turn up to places in the States, and they wouldn't know who we were or where we'd come from, so it was a really interesting journey. But I learnt a lot on this study tour. So I came back to Australia, and I was at a function with Rod Young, who was the then CEO of ACCA, Australian Care, which became Laser.
Right.
So that It was the for-profit association, and they had just started ITAC, the IT in aged care.
Yep.
Having a drink, sitting over a glass of wine at the conference dinner, and he said, Judy, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I said, well, you tell me first, Rod. And he said, well, I'm going to have a winery in Wollongong area or something. What are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to run credible aged care study tours. And we're going to go around the globe and look at what other people are doing, whether they're doing it better or worse, and if it's better, bring those ideas back, and if it's what we think is worse, we're going to look at, is that cultural, and is it cultural, is it really worse? So that was the conversation. So I went to Thomson Adset, and at the time I was also doing some work for Blue Care with Steve Muggleton, was the CEO of Blue Care, and I took the idea to both Steve and Thomson Adset and said, I've got an idea for you, and it's for Thomson Adset, it's a really good marketing idea, because we'll take you already take your clients, so we'll take clients, but we'll take other people. But if we do this as marketing, I don't want to do it. I want to do this as driving industry best practice for our aged care industry. There will be marketing and business development outcomes, but if that's how it's done, I don't want to, it's not how I want to do it or pitch it. But we need industry representatives like Steve Muggleton, CEO of Blue Care. He was trying to change a lot of things then. We were a member of ACSA, we were a member of ACCA, we were a member of the Retirement Village Association had just started. So I said, can I take back all that marketing money that you're paying for an ad in a magazine and you're not really looking where the ad is, and you're paying to go to a conference and you're not really looking where the booth is. A bunch of architects, they'd be in the back booth and I'd be going, why are you in the back booth, not the front booth near the door? Well, they weren't thinking about those sort of things back then. As I said again, it was just the 90s. And all that marketing and conferencing and exposing yourself was just starting in our industry as a real industry. There weren't marketing jobs then or business development jobs. It was just, let's have a conference and by the way, we'll start. So it was all growing and all new. So Thomson Adset said, well, what are you going to do with that, mate? And I said, well, we will use that to fund me putting together the study tours, and then we will go to industry and say, you run these for your members, but instead of being a big sponsor, we will be the sponsor by running it. And that's how it started. So our first study tour was to China in 2006.
Yep.
We had 12 people come, a book, and 9 came. A lot of people said, what are you going to learn about in China? We saw aged care facilities that really were hospitals out of the 40s and 50s. That was one side of the coin. And then we saw community care on the corner of every suburb in the same way we have childcare centres. But this was a country that had grown up with a one-child policy. They were now, urbanisation had started. The son was the golden boy. So we had a lot of daughters with parents but who were married to the sons whose parents had to be looked after as a priority. But China had respite centres, not in the way in that early 2000s that we were running respite centres as almost a, it was a cottage industry, and I will call it for what it was. Our industry then was a cottage industry, the aged care industry, and our respite centres weren't particularly, they were with all good intent, but they were a place for respite for a day for the carers. What we saw in China were university, dancing, calligraphy, active wellness centres that were so far advanced for anything we could conceptualise.
For people of age?
People with age.
Yeah.
So instead of dropping your children at a childcare centre in the morning, you dropped your parents at the they weren't respite centres, at the activity centres, and they were engaged. It was like being on steroids. So people were going, what are you, this is 2006, what have you learnt? And I said, I have learnt more in that 12 days than I've learnt probably in the last, on shifting our idea of not dropping off for care, dropping off for wellness and activity. And it was Tai Chi and wellness, and everything was centred on this. You're coming here because you need a little bit of care, but we're going to give you wellness. And that had a lasting impact on me. And that was, as of 2006, we continued the journey. The next year, I think we went to San Francisco and we saw some amazing places again. There's a program called the PACE program, all person-centred program, which is again, had started interestingly from a Chinese community in San Francisco, which I found interesting, having been to China the year before, and I thought I can make this linkage on culturally. But it was a program where, again, you were taken for the day, but they had then brought transport in, and the transport would go and pick up someone. So we had high care residents who were living at home, brought to the community centre where they were given their high care medical needs as well as all this other activity. But meals were provided, and it was just this functioning, high level, active wellness approach to our parents aren't going to an aged care facility, they're going to stay with us, but we have to work during the day. So the SAGE was born, and SAGE, as I said, I'll go back a step now, again with Rod, sitting around again with Thompson Adset and some other colleagues, I've still got the email of all the acronyms and what could we call this concept of study tours. And I remember coming up with SAGE, you know, the getting of wisdom, and SAGE, that beautiful colour, SAGE, the getting of wisdom, and then we had to find a work backwards, and it was studying and advancing global elder care.
Yeah.
So again, it had this wonderful story to it. It was embraced. We went to ACCA and AXA and said, can you run this as a industry association benefit for your members? And we'll be the major sponsor. I said that a moment ago. And they did. They embraced it as a value add for their members. And that's how it grew. And then it just grew and grew and grew. And we had more demand. We had people coming into the industry, which I'll talk about in a moment now, even more so, that is now in the last few years. But people coming into the industry who weren't from health or were from health, but not aged care. Probably in those days it was more they were from health. Now they're not from a clinical aged care, health or any industry at all. So people were wanting to, somewhere in there, Nick, I'd had a job working when the first Aged Care Act had been. I had a myriad of jobs in there with my husband's posting, all intertwined, all between that and the 90s. But it's interesting to still be around now with the next Aged Care Act, because I remember getting involved in a lot of committees back then for the 1997 Act.
Right.
So that had all happened back just before I went to Malaysia. God, I could talk. You said I had to start talking. You're not going to stop me.
No, it's because I'll stop you when we get bored,
yes.
right? So we're not bored yet.
But that's how SAGE was born and started. And then what I did then was, in those days, we're now using the computers a lot more. So I would look best practice aged care Oregon, and I would search hours upon hours upon hours. Until I thought, well, we're doing this for our AXA and aged care, ACCA, back then, before it became LASER, members. There must be these associations, so I need to get smarter here. So then I would contact the association in Denmark or Sweden or England and say, this is what we're doing in Australia. What are your best practice organisations? Who would you identify as your leaders in industry? So I'd cut down my workload of looking for particular organisations, and I started to channel SAGE through the peak associations, which then I started to know all the people in the peak associations, and then I had already connected with an organisation called IASA, which is the International Association of Homes and Services for the Aged, now known as Global Ageing Network.
Okay.
So I'd contacted IASA and said, this is my intent and this is what I'm doing. And in doing that, I'd found that they were having a conference. So I thought, right, well, I'll take a SAGE trip. We'll go to their conference. We'll connect at this international level at the conference, and then we can collaborate and work out more countries to go to on SAGE, and they can know, what the Australians are doing with this, looking internationally and bringing messages back. And then all sorts of things started to come out of that, exchanges and learning about exchanges, and then coming to your trip. We were going to Belgium, and I knew how the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade worked, and because I'd had a diplomatic posting. So I knew that you had to promote trade and all the rest. And Brendan Nelson was the UN ambassador in Belgium at that stage, and he trained at the Royal Hobart Hospital when I'd trained my nursing as a doctor. He was a doctor, I was a nurse. So I went around a few channels, not through the, let's write 1 million official letters to try and get our Australian delegation to Belgium. I went back and around and ended up, he wrote back very generously and said, I would love to, he's a doctor and knew a lot of my medical friends, so I'd love to host you, but let's not do it at the embassy, we'll do it at our residence. And I knew that there was funding for these sorts of things because we lived that life. So then we're running a delegation to Belgium. We were hosted by the UN ambassador.